Rebecca said she was attacked and her baby taken. Neighbors describe a calm, ordinary evening. That contradiction is the first crack in the case, and in a small town, cracks widen fast. When a parent reports an abduction, the expectation is chaos, screams, cars, witnesses, and commotion. Rebecca's initial account painted that picture: an assault in a parking lot, a parent knocked out, and a child gone when she awoke. News of such a claim sends communities into a fast and fearful response. But the hallmark of a good investigation is not the drama of the claim. It is the forensic test of whether the claim fits the observable world. In this instance, neighbors who live near the scene described the night as quiet, normal, and uneventful. They reported no shouting, no sudden engine noises, and no unusual traffic at the time. Rebecca later said everything happened. For investigators, that mismatch between claimed drama and local memory raised immediate questions. Did the assault happen as described? If so, why did a nearby residential neighborhood report nothing? If not, what explains the difference? In small towns, people pay attention to rhythms. People notice the mail carrier arriving, the dog barking at the end of the block, and neighbors' cars leaving at unusual hours. That attentiveness can be a valuable resource to investigators because local recollections form a rough but real-time map of ordinary activity. When a claim of violence in public meets a chorus of, "We didn't hear anything," the claim must be reconciled with why those sensory witnesses missed it. Several possibilities exist: memory errors under stress, misremembering of time, or, more troubling, deliberate distortion. Investigators must sort among those possibilities methodically. They cross-check neighbor statements, check surveillance cameras from nearby properties and businesses, review 911 audio, and correlate cell tower pings to map who was where at the relevant times. For members of the community who later learned about the inconsistencies, the cognitive dissonance can be agonizing. Many felt they had been mobilized to search a parking lot for a kidnapped infant when, if neighbor accounts were accurate, no abduction had occurred there at the time claimed. That sense of being misled fuels suspicion and anger. Yet investigators refrain from leap to judgment. Human memory is imperfect. The stress of an alleged violent event can alter recollection for both the claimant and the observers. Investigators must therefore treat neighbor reports as important leads that require corroboration rather than definitive proof that the original report was untrue. In short, the first main point is this: a parent's traumatic account and a community's ordinary recollection cannot comfortably coexist without an explanation. Investigators must pursue both paths: the emotional reality of the mother's claim and the material evidence of those who lived through that night, to arrive at a credible timeline. The fact that these two narratives diverge is what transformed a missing child probe into a criminal investigation focused on whether the public story matched private facts. A desert town's silence is not neutral. In this case, it turned the alleged abduction into something that didn't add up. Desert towns are defined by their quiet. In places with low population density and long stretches between homes or businesses, even small disturbances are amplified. Neighbors often know each other, so unexpected activity, especially at odd hours, is noticed quickly. In this instance, the town's quietness did not support the notion of a violent struggle in the middle of a parking lot. Investigators know that public scenes of abduction, especially one involving a panicked mother collapsing, tend to leave traces. A panicked witness, an employee hearing commotion, a passerby stopping, or at least an audible disturbance that radiates into nearby streets. The absence of such signals in a place where silence is the norm made the narrative harder to accept without further proof. Situationally, parking lots are not soundproof. Cars start, doors slam, and people move about. Even if a location is relatively secluded, modern phones and nearby businesses make total silence unlikely. Where there was no corroborating noise, investigators had to look harder at other forms of evidence: video surveillance from the mall and surrounding businesses, cell phone records, and employee logs. The desert town silence didn't disprove the claim by itself. Rather, it increased the evidentiary burden on the claim. It demanded stronger proof, physical traces, matching timestamps, and witnesses who could confirm the sequence of events. The town's general quiet also heightened suspicion because it made the lack of corroboration more meaningful. In a major city, A loud scene can go unnoticed among multiple noises. In a small town, the opposite is true. So the investigator's question became sharper. If no one heard it here, did it happen at all? Or did the story shift time or place? That led to more careful scrutiny of surveillance and time-stamped receipts and a redoubling of efforts to map every person and vehicle in the immediate area at the given time. At the community level, the silence became a social argument point. Some residents felt that silence proved the claim improbable. Others, mindful of trauma and the complexity of memory, cautioned against jumping to conclusions. That tension reflects the difficulty of translating human experience into a legal narrative. Both silence and testimony are pieces of truth, but only when they can be reliably connected to objective evidence do they form a coherent case that holds up under scrutiny. The parking lot location showed no physical evidence, no audio evidence of a struggle, and no surveillance corroboration, and that absence became a central investigative problem. When investigators arrive at an alleged crime scene, their first tasks are to secure physical traces and to canvass for eyewitness accounts. In this case, both routes yielded little. The parking area, assessed by uniformed officers and K-9 units, produced no obvious signs of a violent altercation, no scuff marks, no abandoned personal effects that matched the description of those involved, and no blood or other forensic traces. Further, business surveillance footage covering the lot and adjoining walkways failed to show a stranger grabbing an infant or drag away with a child as Rebecca had described. Those missing elements are not definitive proof against the claim, but they are striking. In modern investigations, the absence of expected evidence raises the same level of alarm as the presence of contradictory evidence. Audio corroboration is a separate and potent form of evidence. Calls to 911, bystander phone recordings, or store employees' recollections of sudden noise can confirm that something traumatic occurred. In this instance, investigators found number 911 call that matched an immediate assault in the lot, and employees at businesses facing that area reported nothing akin to the panic described. Given the time sensitivity of auditory and visual evidence, investigators treat such absences seriously. They work to determine whether timestamps were misremembered, whether footage was missing due to technical issues, or whether other nearby cameras captured different angles. Technicians therefore widened the search for footage, seeking doorbell cams, traffic cams, and private security systems that might have recorded peripheral activity, any small clip that could confirm movement inconsistent with the official story. The absence of physical traces also invites hypotheses about later removal or staged scenes, which is why forensic teams extend their search beyond the immediate parking area. They look at car interiors, check for recently cleaned fabrics, and inspect nearby surfaces for signs of recent contact. If evidence was intentionally removed, the investigators then pursue other lines. Did the household dispose of items? Were there subsequent trips to donation centers or pawn shops that align with eliminatory behavior? The parking lot void therefore drives the investigation toward a more detailed examination of the family's activities before and after the reported incident. Crucially, an absence of corroborating evidence must always be treated carefully in public communications. Publicly declaring an absence before exhaustive checks can damage investigative leads. Yet, failing to explain why expected evidence is missing invites public suspicion and rumor. Investigators must thread this needle, expand the search discreetly, follow every trace, and reveal the results only when they are verified and legally defensible. Residents contrasted their lived memories with the official account, and that grassroots reconstruction turned into a powerful force in the case. When official narratives falter, communities often fill gaps by reconstructing events themselves. That's what happened here. Neighbors pooled recollections, compared notes, and used home security footage or dashcam clips to make a civic reconstruction of the alleged crime. This is both a blessing and a complication for law enforcement. On the one hand, citizen-sourced evidence can be invaluable. A time-stamped doorbell video can confirm or refute a movement. A dashcam can show a license plate passing at an important moment. On the other hand, ad hoc reconstructions can spread unverified conclusions that hinder formal inquiries. In this town, residents who lived near the scene compared times of their routine activities with claimed timestamps and found no overlap that matched the dramatic story. Their conversations created a more detailed mosaic of that night: who returned home when, which cars were on the street, and when dogs started barking. That detailed local accounting quickly became part of the public record. Journalists and community leaders used these reconstructions to press law enforcement for clearer explanations. For detectives, resident reconstructions pointed to valuable leads, specific cameras or witnesses to check, but they also introduced noise. Investigators had to sift the helpful confirmations from the misleading memories. They did so by cross-checking resident reports with objective data, receipts, CCTV timecodes, and phone records, rather than relying on memory alone. Public reconstructions also increased pressure on authorities to be transparent. Locals demanded that officials either corroborate the abduction claim or explain why they believed the family's report despite neighborhood testimony to the contrary. That demand for clarity is understandable. Citizens want to feel safe, and they want to know whether their city was the site of a violent crime or the stage of a misreported incident. The challenge for law enforcement was to respond in a way that preserved investigative integrity while providing the community enough information to maintain public trust. A neighbor observed Rebecca walking normally before cameras, then limping once recording began, a small detail that raised large questions about performance and credibility. Small, seemingly inconsequential behaviors can carry oversized weight in a public narrative, particularly in tight-knit communities. In this case, a neighbor's observation about Rebecca's gait became a focal point. The neighbor said Rebecca appeared to walk unimpeded at first, but then showed a limp once she noticed cameras. That anecdote was quickly amplified on social platforms and in casual conversations around town. Human behavior under observation can change for many reasons, and investigators know this. People walk differently when they believe they're being watched. Pain can be intermittent, and the awareness of cameras can cause a person to alter posture or pace unconsciously. However, when that change in gait is juxtaposed with a serious claim of assault, the public's interpretive lens often slides toward viewing the behavior as staged. Such interpretations can quickly harden into community consensus if not corrected by clear, corroborating evidence. The implications for the investigation were twofold. Legally, the observed change in gait is not proof of deception, but it is circumstantial evidence the prosecution or defense may use as part of a broader narrative about credibility. Investigators therefore treated the neighbor's observations seriously but cautiously. They sought to corroborate it with other footage, to determine if the limp appeared in multiple angles or was a momentary posture change. If the limp was present inconsistently, it could suggest a performance. If consistent, it could indicate a real injury whose pain varied with movement. The neighbor's account had a profound social effect. It fed suspicion and made community members more likely to scrutinize other actions. Behavior that might have been read as ordinary, stopping at a store, checking a phone, instead became suspicious. That shift illustrates how singular observations in a small community can amplify into generalized doubt, altering how people interpret all subsequent information. That limp and other perceived performances eroded credibility for some and fueled the idea that elements of the scene were staged. Public perception often hinges on credibility. Once credibility is damaged, every statement is reinterpreted through a skeptical filter. The limp anecdote combined with timeline inconsistencies and the lack of physical evidence fed a narrative arc, a public performance intended to make a cover story appear plausible. Whether that was the case or not is a question for evidence, but perception matters in a trial by media environment. Prosecutors must be aware of narrative momentum. Defense counsel will attempt to use apparent public skepticism to their advantage by asserting that prejudice has tainted the jury pool. For investigators, the stakes are straightforward. If the limp and other oddities are signs of staging, then motive and intent become central to the case. If they are not, investigators must guard against confirmation bias. The team must continue testing all leads, even those that contradict a now prominent suspicions, while ensuring that investigative energy is not diverted by sensational but flimsy evidence. The social consequence is harder to repair. Once people decide that a behavior looks staged, that impression tends to spread and harden. That's why careful, transparent investigative communication is essential. To contextualize odd behaviors, to explain what evidence can and cannot show, and to prevent rumor from preempting justice. Community reconstruction clashed with police caution. Locals demanded answers while investigators prioritized preserving leads and evidence. The public wanted quick clarity. Investigators worked behind the scenes. That tension is classic in high-profile cases. In the Haro matter, the community's active role, reconstruction, footage sharing, and social pressure conversations collided with law enforcement's need for confidentiality. Detectives resisted oversharing because revealing detail can tip suspects, compromise undercover operations, or contaminate witness memories. Conversely, withholding too much breeds distrust and fertile ground for speculation. Investigators attempted to strike a balance, provide regular, basic updates on the procedural steps being taken, searches, warrants, arrests, while keeping specifics of active leads and evidence out of the public stream. This approach is not infallible in preventing rumor, but it guards the investigation's integrity. The challenge is communicating that no comment does not equal no action. The public needs reassurance that is best provided by transparent processes, periodic verified updates, and invitations to share legitimate tips, rather than by airing raw, unverified details. A father's whispered confession exists, yet no body has been found. A confession without corroboration that leaves the case suspended between belief and doubt. One of the most wrenching elements in this story is the report of a confession. According to accounts, the father, while in custody, admitted in a whisper to an inmate that he caused the child's death and buried the body. But no remains have been recovered, and that gap prevents definitive closure. Jailhouse confessions are notoriously complex legally. They may be truthful, manipulative, or entirely fabricated for gain. Courts scrutinize such admissions intensely because of their vulnerability to contamination and motive-based falsehoods. Investigators treat such a confession as a lead, a strong one perhaps, but still a lead that must be corroborated. They will follow any geographic pointers given, but they will demand physical evidence, a body, DNA, or artifacts that can be objectively linked to Emmanuel. Without that evidence, the confession carries limited legal weight. It can inform searches and guide excavation, but it cannot replace the scientific confirmation necessary for conviction. For the public, the moral anguish is acute. Hearing that a parent allegedly confessed while no body has been recovered creates cognitive whiplash. Closure seems offered and then withheld. For investigators, the response has been methodical. Attempt to corroborate the confession through geolocation, searches in targeted areas, forensic analysis of seized items, and comparison with known timelines. The absence of remains, however, leaves the truth suspended, and the case remains a painful combination of alleged admission and evidentiary absence. The missing kidney detail you mentioned, an unverified claim that anatomical parts were missing, compounded public horror and fueled conspiracy. Such assertions must be treated with utmost caution. They are inflammatory, easily amplified online, and yet profoundly impactful emotionally. Investigators will examine medical records, autopsy findings if remains are recovered, and any forensic traces that speak to cause and manner of death. Until physical evidence is found and properly analyzed, these lurid details must be regarded as unconfirmed and potentially harmful speculation. Wrap up. This case sits at the fraught crossroads of testimony, observation, and the limits of evidence. Testimony alone can be powerful, but when it contradicts a community's collective memory and lacks physical corroboration, suspicion grows. Body language and small observed behaviors, like a limp noticed at precisely the moment people began recording, can shift public perception dramatically, but they rarely substitute for forensic proof. A whispered confession without a recovered body leaves investigators with a difficult duty. Pursue leads relentlessly while resisting the pressure to declare certainty before proof exists. What remains constant is the human cost. An infant is missing, a neighborhood is fractured, and families are left without answers. If you have verifiable information, a video, or receipt, or a memory with a clear timestamp, pass it to investigators rather than posting it online. The truth in this case will not be settled by rumor or by the loudest voice on social feeds. It will be built, slowly and carefully, by corroborated evidence, by forensic science, and by witnesses who step forward with verifiable details. The community's role is vital. Share what you know, preserve what you have, and demand that investigators follow every credible lead until the unanswered questions become answers.